What happens when royal entitlement meets late-night television's most ruthless interviewer? You won't believe what unfolds when Prince Harry sits down with Stephen Colbert for what was supposed to be a friendly promotional chat, only to have it spiral into one of the most explosive confrontations in talk show history. The tension builds from the very first question, escalating into a battle of egos that leaves both men looking absolutely terrible, culminating in a dramatic walkout that has everyone talking. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two clash in the most uncomfortable interview ever recorded. The Late Show studio felt different last night. There was an electric tension in the air as Prince Harry made his entrance, that familiar smirk playing across his face as he waved to the audience with the kind of rehearsed charm that screams calculated rather than genuine. Stephen Colbert, meanwhile, sat behind his desk with his trademark grin, but those who know his interviewing style could see the predatory glint in his eyes. This wasn't going to be another softball interview. "Your Royal Highness," Colbert began, his voice dripping with mock reverence as Harry settled into the guest chair. "Or should I say, just Harry now? I can never keep track of all the title changes in your family." The audience chuckled nervously, but Harry's smile faltered for just a split second before he recovered. "Just Harry works fine, Stephen. Though I notice you seem to have an obsession with titles for someone who supposedly champions equality." Harry's response came with an edge that caught even Colbert off guard. The prince leaned back in his chair with that entitled posture that suggested he thought he was doing Colbert a favor just by being there. Colbert's eyebrows shot up, his practiced television smile never wavering. But there was something darker brewing underneath. "Oh, I love it when my guests come with their own zingers preloaded. Tell me, Harry, how does it feel to be the most famous unemployed person in America right now?" The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Harry's face flushed slightly, his jaw tightening as he processed what had just been said to him on national television. "Unemployed? I think you might want to check your research team, Stephen, because last I checked, Netflix doesn't hand out $100 million deals to unemployed people." Right. The Netflix deal." Colbert nodded with exaggerated understanding, shuffling through his index cards with theatrical precision. "The one where you got paid astronomical amounts to essentially complain about your family for 6 hours. Very entrepreneurial of you. Most people have to work their way up to getting paid for family drama. But I suppose when you're born into it, you skip right to the monetization phase." The audience was sensing the shift now. What had started as typical late-night banter was becoming something much more uncomfortable. Harry's media training was clearly being tested as his composure began to crack around the edges. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair just a little too tightly. "You know what, Stephen? I came here tonight thinking we might have an actual conversation about the work I'm doing, the causes I support, maybe even talk about my book," Harry said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone that members of the royal family perfect from birth. "But it seems like you're more interested in cheap shots and tabloid gossip than actual journalism." Colbert leaned forward, his smile becoming razor-sharp. "Oh, Harry, my sweet, naive prince. You walked into the wrong studio if you thought you were going to get a puff piece. This isn't Good Morning America, and I'm not going to sit here and nod while you rewrite history to make yourself look like the victim in every story you tell." The tension in the studio was becoming palpable. Audience members were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether they were witnessing great television or a career-ending disaster for both men. Harry's face was now noticeably red, his royal composure cracking as he realized he had severely underestimated his opponent. "Rewrite history." Harry's voice rose slightly, his British accent becoming more pronounced as his anger grew. "I lived it, Stephen. Every painful, suffocating moment of it. But I suppose sitting in your comfortable little bubble here in New York, making jokes about other people's trauma, is easier than actually understanding what it means to have your entire life scrutinized and manipulated by people who've never met you." Colbert wasn't backing down. If anything, Harry's emotional response seemed to energize him. "Oh, the scrutiny. How terrible it must be to have people pay attention to you when you've spent your entire adult life desperately trying to stay relevant. Tell me, if the media attention is so awful, why do you keep giving interviews? Why the book? Why the documentary? Why are you here right now, Harry?" The question hit like a sledgehammer. Harry opened his mouth to respond, then closed it, clearly, struggling to find an answer that wouldn't make him look like a hypocrite. The pause stretched on for what felt like an eternity, the silence in the studio becoming deafening. "I'm here because I have important things to say," Harry finally managed, but his voice lacked conviction. "Because there are issues that matter, causes that need attention, and unlike some people, I'm trying to use my platform for good instead of just making jokes about serious problems." Colbert laughed, a sound that had absolutely no warmth in it. "Platform? Harry, your platform is built entirely on the foundation of the institution you claim to despise. Without the royal family, without that title you supposedly don't want, you're just another privileged rich kid with opinions. The only reason anyone cares what you have to say is because of the very system you've made a career out of criticizing." The accusation landed like a physical blow. Harry's composure finally shattered completely, his face contorting with rage as he leaned forward in his chair. "You don't know what you're talking about, Stephen. You have no idea what it's like to be trapped in a system that chews people up and spits them out, that destroys anyone who doesn't fit perfectly into their narrow little box." "Trapped?" Colbert's voice was incredulous now, his own anger starting to show through his television persona. "You were born into unimaginable privilege, Harry. You had every advantage, every opportunity, every door opened for you before you could even walk. And instead of being grateful, instead of using that privilege responsibly, you've turned it into a victim narrative that you're selling to the highest bidder." But what happened next would turn this already explosive interview into something that neither man could walk away from unscathed. Harry's eyes flashed with a dangerous intensity as he stood up from his chair, towering over Colbert's desk in a move that sent shockwaves through the studio audience. "Grateful? You want to talk about gratitude, Stephen? Let me tell you what I'm grateful for. I'm grateful that I finally had the courage to walk away from a toxic family that cared more about protecting pedophiles than protecting their own children." The studio fell into stunned silence. Even Colbert, master of quick comebacks, seemed momentarily speechless at the nuclear bomb Harry had just dropped on live television. The prince wasn't finished, his voice growing louder and more unhinged. With each word, "I'm grateful that I escaped before they destroyed me completely, the way they destroyed my mother. But most of all, Stephen, I'm grateful that I don't have to sit here and take sanctimonious lectures from some middle-aged comedian who thinks making jokes about real trauma makes him some kind of moral authority." Colbert's face had gone completely white, but the fire in his eyes suggested he was about to unleash something devastating in return. He slowly stood up from behind his desk, matching Harry's aggressive posture with his own barely contained fury. "You want to go there, Harry? Really? You want to invoke your mother's memory to justify your petty grievances and cash grabs?" Colbert's voice was trembling with rage now, all pretense of television civility abandoned. "Diana would be ashamed of what you've become. She spent her life trying to help people who actually needed help, not whining about how hard it is to be rich and famous." The accusation hit Harry like a physical assault. His face went from red to purple, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. Several security personnel had quietly moved closer to the stage, sensing that this confrontation was spiraling completely out of control. "Don't you dare." Harry's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more menace than if he had been shouting. "Don't you dare talk about my mother. You didn't know her. You have no right to speak her name, let alone judge what she would think about anything." Colbert wasn't backing down. If anything, Harry's reaction seemed to fuel his determination to push even harder. "I don't need to have known her personally to see the difference between someone who used their privilege to help others and someone who uses their trauma to help themselves to millions of dollars. Your mother fought for causes bigger than herself. You fight for Netflix contracts and book deals." The comparison was brutal, surgical in its precision, and it found its mark. Harry's entire body was shaking now, his royal composure completely obliterated as he struggled to form coherent words. Through his rage, "My mother was murdered by the same system I'm trying to expose." Harry screamed, his voice cracking with emotion. "She was hounded to death by the press, by the paparazzi, by people exactly like you who think other people's pain is entertainment. And you sit there making jokes about it like it's some kind of game." The audience was frozen in horror. This had gone far beyond uncomfortable television into something genuinely disturbing. Colbert, however, seemed energized by Harry's breakdown, as if he smelled blood in the water. Your mother died in a car accident, Harry. A tragic accident caused by a drunk driver and her own decision not to wear a seatbelt. But you've turned it into this elaborate conspiracy theory because the truth isn't dramatic enough for your victim. Narrative. She wasn't murdered by the system. She was failed by it, just like you're failing her memory right now. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Harry's face went through a series of expressions: shock, rage, disbelief, and finally, something that looked almost feral. When he spoke again, his voice was cold and deadly calm. You know what, Stephen? I thought you were just another ignorant American who didn't understand the complexities of what I've been through. But now I see what you really are. You're a bully. A pathetic, aging bully who gets his kicks tearing down people who've already been through hell because it makes you feel powerful. Colbert laughed, but there was no humor in it whatsoever. I'm a bully? That's rich coming from someone who spent the last 3 years systematically destroying his own family's reputation for profit. You've turned being a prince into being a professional victim, and now you're upset that someone finally called you on it. Harry took a step closer to Colbert's desk, his movements so aggressive that security personnel began moving toward the stage. Professional victim? I survived a childhood that would have broken most people. I watched my mother's funeral turn into a media circus. I served my country in Afghanistan while you were here making jokes about other people's service. And when I finally found the courage to speak my truth, people like you decided that my pain was fair game for comedy. Your truth. Colbert's voice was dripping with contempt. Harry, your truth changes every time you give an interview. First, the royal family was racist. Then they were just concerned about your children's skin color. First, you wanted privacy. Then you signed deals to share every intimate detail of your life. First, you respected your father. Then he cut you off financially for no reason. Which version of your truth should we believe today? The systematic destruction of Harry's credibility was methodical and merciless. Each contradiction Colbert laid out seemed to strip away another layer of the prince's carefully constructed public image, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. Those aren't contradictions, Harry said, but his voice lacked conviction. Those are the complexities of real situations that you're oversimplifying to make your points. Real life isn't as black and white as your comedy bits. Real life, Colbert, was relentless now. Harry, you haven't lived in real life since the day you were born. You've lived in palaces and private schools and exclusive clubs, surrounded by people whose job it is to tell you you're special. And now you want us to believe that you're some kind of everyman hero fighting against depression? The only thing you're fighting against is irrelevance. Harry's breathing was becoming labored, his composure hanging by the thinnest of threads. The studio audience could sense that something explosive was about to happen, but no one knew exactly what form it would take. You don't understand anything, Harry said, his voice breaking slightly. You think this is all some kind of performance, some calculated move for attention. But every word I've spoken, every story I've told, comes from a place of real pain that I've carried for decades. Pain that you've monetized, Colbert shot back immediately. Pain that you've packaged and sold and marketed like any other product. If your trauma is so sacred, Harry, why does it have a price tag? The question hit like a knockout punch, and Harry's face crumpled as if he'd been physically struck. For a moment, he looked less like a prince and more like a broken man who had just realized he was completely out of his depth. But then something shifted in his expression, something dangerous and unpredictable, and it became clear that this confrontation was about to reach a point from which there would be no return. Harry's eyes narrowed to slits, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a venom that shocked even Colbert into momentary silence. You want to talk about monetizing pain, Stephen? Let's talk about your show. Every night you sit here profiting off other people's misery, turning political tragedy into punchlines, exploiting every crisis for ratings. At least I'm honest about what I'm doing. The accusation landed with devastating effect. Colbert's confident smirk faltered for the first time in the entire interview, and Harry pressed his advantage like a predator sensing weakness. You think you're some noble crusader for truth? You're a parasite, Stephen. You feed off chaos and controversy, and when there isn't enough happening in the world to satisfy your appetite, you create it. Like right now. Like this exact moment. Colbert's face was flushing red now, his carefully maintained television persona cracking under the unexpected assault. That's rich coming from someone whose entire post-royal career is built on selling family secrets to the highest bidder. At least my show serves a purpose beyond just settling personal grudges. Personal grudges. Harry's laugh was harsh and bitter. Stephen, everything you've said tonight proves that this was never about journalism or entertainment. This was about you wanting to tear down someone you see as privileged, someone you resent for having things you never had. You're not interviewing me. You're punishing me for being born into circumstances you wish you'd had. The psychological warfare was brutal, each man finding the other's deepest insecurities and attacking them with surgical precision. Colbert stood up straighter, his jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. Don't psychoanalyze me, Harry. I don't need a trust fund prince playing amateur therapist. You want to know what I resent? I resent people who are handed everything in life and then complain that it wasn't handed to them in exactly the right way. You had opportunities most people can only dream of, and you've wasted them on petty revenge against your own family. Wasted them. Harry's voice rose to a near shout. I've brought attention to mental health issues, veterans' causes, environmental concerns, things that actually matter. What have you done besides make jokes and cash checks? At least my platform comes with responsibility. Yours comes with nothing but cynicism and cheap laughs. The attack stung because it contained just enough truth to be devastating. Colbert's face contorted with rage as he realized he was losing control of his own show, his own narrative, to someone he had underestimated. Completely. Responsibility? Harry, you've single-handedly damaged one of the world's most respected institutions because you couldn't handle not being the favorite son. You've turned your grandmother's final years into a public relations nightmare because you needed to settle scores. That's not responsibility. That's selfishness on a global scale. The mention of the Queen was the final straw. Harry's composure didn't just crack, it exploded into 1,000 pieces. His face went white with rage, and when he spoke, his voice was shaking with barely controlled fury. How dare you bring my grandmother into this? She loved me, Stephen. She understood what I was going through in ways that small-minded people like you never could. And she would be disgusted by what you're doing right now, attacking her grandson on television for entertainment. Colbert sensed he had pushed too far, but his own anger had taken control now, and he couldn't pull back. Your grandmother spent 70 years building the reputation of the monarchy, and you've spent the last 3 trying to tear it down. If she loved you, Harry, she'd be heartbroken by what you've become. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Harry stood frozen for a moment, his face cycling through expressions of shock, pain, and finally, cold determination. When he spoke again, his voice was deadly quiet. That's enough. He reached up and began unhooking his lapel microphone with shaking hands. I've sat here and listened to you attack everything I care about, everyone I love, and I've tried to defend myself with facts and reason. But you're not interested in either. You're interested in blood sport. Colbert realized the interview was slipping away from him entirely, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. Running away, Harry? That seems to be your solution to every difficult situation. When things get tough, you pack up and leave. Your country, your family, and now my show. Harry's hands stilled on his microphone, and he looked up at Colbert with an expression of pure contempt. You know what, Stephen? You're right. I am leaving. But not because I'm running away, because I have too much self-respect to sit here and be abused by a bitter, failed comedian who thinks cruelty is the same thing as wit. The insult hit Colbert like a physical blow. His face went from red to purple, and his voice when he responded was barely controlled. Failed comedian? I have multiple Emmy Awards, a successful show, and the respect of my peers. What do you have, besides a title you abandoned and a family you betrayed? Harry finished removing his microphone and dropped it on the floor with a gesture of absolute finality. I have my integrity, Stephen. I have my wife, my children, and my freedom. I have the ability to sleep at night knowing I haven't built my career on destroying other people for entertainment. Can you say the same? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Colbert opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. For the first time in the entire confrontation, he seemed genuinely speechless, faced with an accusation he couldn't deflect or joke away. Harry straightened his jacket and looked directly into the camera, speaking to the audience rather than to Colbert. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what passes for journalism in America today. Character assassination disguised as entertainment. I hope you enjoyed the show, because this is the last time you'll see me participate in this kind of circus. He turned back to Colbert one final time, his voice cold and final. Stephen, I came here tonight hoping for a real conversation about real issues. Instead, I got ambushed by someone who thinks cruelty is clever and destruction is drama. You've shown America exactly who you really are tonight, and I don't think you're going to like what they think of it. Colbert, still struggling to find his voice, managed to stammer, Harry, wait, let's just. But Harry was already walking toward the exit, his posture straight and dignified despite everything that had transpired. No, Stephen, we're done. You wanted a show? You got one. But you also got something else. You got exposed as the bully you really are, on your own program, in front of your own audience. The studio was in complete chaos now. Audience members were on their feet, some cheering, others booing, most just stunned by what they had witnessed. Camera operators were frantically trying to decide where to focus as Harry made his way to the exit. Colbert, realizing his show was falling apart around him, made one last desperate attempt to regain control. Security, don't let him leave. We're still recording. But Harry had already reached the studio doors. He paused for just a moment, looking back at the chaos he was leaving behind. Colbert standing behind his desk looking defeated and desperate. The audience in complete uproar, the entire production in shambles. Goodbye, Stephen, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the studio despite the noise. Maybe next time you'll think twice before trying to destroy someone just because you can. And with that, Prince Harry walked out of the Late Show studio, leaving behind one of the most explosive and career-damaging confrontations in late-night television history. Both men had revealed their worst selves to the world, but in the end, it was Harry who had managed to maintain the last shred of dignity by being the one with enough self-respect to walk away. The studio doors closed behind him with a final, definitive click, and Stephen Colbert was left standing alone on his own stage, facing an audience that had just watched him systematically destroy his own reputation in real time. The show would go on, but after tonight, nothing would ever be quite the same for either man.